Welcome to the 2015 Enercom Oil and Gas Conference in Denver, the 20th year. I'm Angie Austin with Oil and Gas 360, and we're joined now by Jeb Armstrong. He is Vice President at Energy Research at the Marwood Group. Welcome, Jeb. All right, let's just start off and get right into that. Marwood Research Group focuses on tracking and analyzing regulatory and legislative catalysts in energy and healthcare, and you, Jeb, are focused on the energy side. So what's the firm's approach to energy research?
Well, I think when it comes to energy specifically, the industry is really leading the charge here. In the last 10 years, you've seen a dramatic shift in the industry, a lot of change. And so, in many respects, government's trying to catch up with what's been going on. And so, it starts with an understanding what the industry is doing, and then goes on from there in terms of what government would like to do from a regulatory perspective going forward.
All right, let's talk about the EPA. What's your view of the EPA's revised Clean Power Plan? Its tough restrictions on CO2 emissions. Will this mark the end of coal-fired power plants in the U.S., or are we going to have decades of court challenges? What's going to happen in your view?
Court challenges are inevitable. You're going to have this regardless, so that's going to happen. But I think when you look in the numbers on the Clean Power Plan, coal is still there. Coal is still a substantial part of the overall mix. Obviously less of a part than it might be otherwise. But clearly it's something that will remain as part of the overall part of energy generation across the country. Clearly, natural gas and renewables will become a much larger piece of that. But I think there's a fundamental flaw within the Clean Power Plan, and that is that it assumes that demand is going to be flat over the next 15 years or so. We've had flat demand over the last 10 years, but that's primarily because we had recession and the slow recovery coming out of that. It assumes a lot of efficiency gains coming forward through demand response and so forth over the next 15 years, and I think that may be a flawed assumption within their paradigm, and I think if anything that may be challenged.
All right, let's get into a little political question here. If an oil and gas company is looking to win federal leases in the western U.S. to explore for and develop oil and gas resources, what's the level of political risk presented by the U.S. government and all of its rule-making agencies in your view?
Obviously, from the company's perspective, it's noisome, but I think overall the actual impact is relatively limited. I would say the actual risk is small. It's not a gating issue. It's not going to stop a company from making that decision. It is onerous. It requires a lot of paperwork, but it's largely duplicative in terms of what it addresses. Will it stop companies from investing in federal lands? Probably not. Obviously, the price of oil and natural gas have come down dramatically, and that's causing people to think twice about it. But will it have an overall impact? Probably, we think that would be constrained at worst.
Okay.
It won't be that substantial.
All right, let's talk community rule. Let's touch on that. What's going to happen with the community rule initiatives around the country? The attorneys say that companies won't be able to effectively operate in an area with a complex patchwork of regulations. It's just too fragmented. So how can states maintain regulatory control and still respond to the needs of local communities, and is that even possible?
Well, the lawyer is absolutely right, and that's sort of the goal of much of the environmental movement is if you make it very difficult to move forward, you effectively cease the drilling activity. I think Colorado is a great example of how to move forward with respect to the issue of local control. You look at the governor's blue ribbon panel that came out with some recommendations this winter. The real issue really isn't about whether or not to allow drilling. It's to make sure that the industry doesn't run roughshod over local constituents, and that the local concerns are actually met, and that there's good oversight on the state level. States will remain in firm control. However, as long as they're working with and paying attention to local needs, and also providing a firm hand on top of what the industry is doing to make sure they don't do whatever they want, and keep them honest, I think that's really what individuals are looking for. But if you think about what happened in Texas as well, there was the city of Denton tried to put through a ban, and it did in fact, and then Austin reacted very quickly and overturned that and said, no, you can't have any control over that whatsoever. There are some exceptions to that. California, perhaps, they've had some ballot initiatives to ban drilling and hydraulic fracturing in some of the counties, but the counties are very large there. And the key counties, like for example Kern County, there's nothing like that coming forward. And even Santa Barbara County has voted to not ban hydraulic fracturing within its boundaries. So by and large, the effort for local control is much more, in some respects, it's an effort by the environmental groups to fragment, but it's largely not been successful so far.
All right, you mentioned earlier we were talking about, you've been to the conference several times. This year, what are people asking you about? What are they curious about? What topic keeps coming up? How are they picking your brain?
Oh, well, there's a lot of stuff that's always out there. Obviously, the BLM regulations is something that's in people's minds. Crude oil exports, that's a big deal, and clearly something that's coming forward. Methane emission rules is something else that's been coming out. There are a lot of items that have come through. The Clean Power Plan certainly is front and center in many people's minds because it just came out. A lot of that's more political in nature than actual in terms of the impact directly on the energy companies. But I think the ban on crude oil exports is a really big deal.
Yeah.
And that's clearly something there's going to be a lot of talk and a lot of conversation in D.C. on that coming this fall. Our view is that nothing happens until after the next election, so in the near term it's nothing more than noise. However, there will be a lot of headline risk that comes from that.
Excellent. Anything that you've picked up on the conference that was interesting or new, or did you get anything out of it this year or more than?
Yeah,
it's a
I
pretty
think
good turnout.
Yeah, it's terrific. I think my number one takeaway was that the Saudis are in trouble.
And in terms of your meetings and everything, has that been really productive for you in meeting with people?
Oh, this is always a
talking
great
to
use
people?
of time.
Yeah.
It always is. Yeah, it's tremendous.
It is.
Informed investors, management teams, and so forth, always eager to have that dialogue.
Well, interesting to talk to you. Jeb Armstrong with the Marwood Group. I'm Angie Austin with Oil and Gas 360. Thanks for joining us.